the chat. Hi, everybody. How's it going? Welcome to Little House Live, day 21. And we are almost finished with this book. I'm going to say probably in the next week, we will be, well, not in the next week. In the next two readings, we'll probably finish this book. And then we'll go back to then we'll go to Little House on the Prairie, the book, and back into the autobiography, right? Hey, 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 how's everybody doing? Is everybody ready? I better change I gotta change my glasses. These are computer glasses. You know, I have lots of computer glasses, but I really should have more bifocals. All righty then. Little House Live, Farmer Boy, Chapter 22, Fall of the Year. Now, I think these next four chapters are really short, so I'm going to read four, okay? Fall of the Year. Winds in the north, Father said at breakfast, and clouds coming. The beech nuts in before it snows. The beech trees grew in the timber lot, 2 miles away by road, but only a half-mile across the fields. Mr. Webb was a good neighbor and let Father drive across his land. Almanzo and Royal put on their caps and warm coats. Alice put on her cloak and hood, and they rode away with Father in the wagon to gather the beech nuts. When they came to a stone fence, Almanzo helped take it down and let the wagon through. The pastures were empty now. All the stock was in the warm barns, so they could leave the fences down until the last trip home. In the beech grove, all the yellow leaves had fallen. They lay thick on the ground beneath the slim trunks and delicate bare limbs of the beeches. The beech nuts had fallen after the leaves and lay on top of them. Father and Royal lifted the matted leaves carefully on their pitchforks and put them, nuts and all, into the wagon. And Alice and Almanzo ran up and down in the wagon, trampling down the rustling leaves to make room for more. When the wagon was full, Royal drove away with Father to the barns, but Almanzo and Alice stayed to play till the wagon came back. A chill wind was blowing and the sunlight was hazy. Squirrels frisked about, storing away nuts for the winter. High in the sky, the wild ducks were honking, hurrying south. It was a wonderful day for playing wild Indian all among the trees. When Almanzo was tired of playing Indian, he and Alice sat on a log and cracked beech nuts in their teeth. Beech nuts are three-cornered and shiny brown and small, but every shell is solidly full of nut. They're so good that nobody could ever eat enough of them. At least Almanzo never got tired of eating them before the wagon came back. Then he and Alice trampled down leaves again, while the busy pitchforks made the patch of bare ground larger and larger. It took almost all day to gather all the beech nuts. In the cold twilight, Almanzo helped lay up the stone fence behind the last load. All the beech nuts in their leaves made a big pile on the south barn floor, beside the fanning mill. That night, Father said they'd seen the last of Indian summer. "It'll snow tonight," he said. Sure enough, when Almanzo woke the next morning, the light had a snowy look, and from the window, he saw the ground and the barn roofs white with snow. Father was pleased. The soft snow was 6 inches deep, but the ground was not yet frozen. Poor man's fertilizer. Mark that. Father called such a snow, and he set Royal to plowing it all. Okay, poor man's fertilizer, Father called such a snow, and he set Royal to plowing it all into all the fields. It carried something from the air into the ground that would make the crops grow. Meanwhile, Almanzo helped Father. They tightened the barn's wooden windows and nailed down every board that had loosened in the summer sun and rain. They banked the walls of the barn with straw from the stalls, and they banked the walls of the house with clean, bright straw. They laid stones on the straw to hold it snug against the winds. They, they fitted storm doors and storm windows on the house just in time. That week ended with the first hard freeze. Bitter cold weather had come to stay, and now it was butchering time. In the cold dawn before breakfast, Almanzo helped Royal set up the big iron cauldron near the barn. They set it on stones and filled it with water and lighted a bonfire under it. It held 3 barrels of water. Before they had finished, Lazy John and French Joe had come, and there was time to snatch only a bite of breakfast. 5 hogs and a yearling beef were to be killed that day. As soon as one was killed, Father and Joe and John dipped the carcass into the boiling cauldron and heaved it out and laid it on boards. With butcher knives, they scraped all the hair off it. Then they hung it up by the hind feet in a tree and cut it open and took out all the insides into a tub. Almanzo and Royal carried the tub to the kitchen, and Mother and the girls washed the heart and liver and snipped off all the bits of fat from the hog's insides to make lard. Mark that, too. Father and Joe skinned the beef carefully. Oh, okay. Oh, to make lard. Sorry, it felt like I missed a paragraph, but I didn't. Father and Joe skinned the beef carefully. The hide came off in one big piece. Every year, Father killed a beef and saved the hide to make shoes. All that afternoon, the men were cutting the meat, and Almanzo and Royal were hurrying to put it away. All the pieces of fat pork they packed in salt. Okay, excuse me. All the pieces of fat pork they packed in salt in barrels down cellar. The hams and shoulders they slid carefully into barrels of brown pork pickle, which Mother had made of salt, maple sugar, saltpeter, and water boiled together. Pork pickle had a stinging smell that felt like a sneeze. Spare ribs, backbones, hearts, livers, tongues, and all the sausage meat had to go into the woodshed attic. Father and Joe hung the quarters of beef in there too. The meat would freeze in the attic and stay frozen all winter in the attic of the shed. Butchering was finished that night. I'm sorry, folks. I'm a little discombobulated. I've been doing a lot of editing today. French Joe and Lazy John went whistling home with fresh meat to pay for their work, and Mother baked spare ribs for dinner. Almanzo loved to gnaw the meat from the long, curved, flat bones. He liked the brown pork gravy, too, on the creamy mashed potatoes. All next week, Mother and the girls were hard at work. You notice the men all worked at one day, eh? Like for one day, they butchered 5 hogs and a beef. All the next week, Mother and the girls were hard at work, and Mother kept Almanzo in the kitchen to help. They cut up the pork fat and boiled it in big kettles on the stove. When it was done, Mother strained the clear hot lard through white cloths into big stone jars. Crumbling brown cracklings were left inside the cloth after Mother squeezed it, and Almanzo sneaked a few and ate them whenever he could. Mother said they were too rich for him. She put them away to be used for seasoning cornbread. Then she made the head cheese. She boiled the 6 heads till the meat came off the bones. She chopped it and seasoned it and mixed it with liquor from the boiling and poured it into 6-quart pans. When it was cold, it was like jelly, for a gelatin had come out of the bones. Next, Mother made mincemeat. She boiled the best bits of beef and pork and chopped them fine. She mixed in raisins and spices, sugar and vinegar, chopped apples and brandy, and she packed 2 big jars full of mincemeat. It smelled delicious, and she let Almanzo eat the scraps left in the mixing bowl. All this time, he was grinding sausage meat. He poked thousands of pieces of meat into the grinder and turned the handle round and round for hours and hours. He was glad when that was finished. Mother seasoned the meat and molded it into big balls, and Almanzo had to carry all those balls into the woodshed attic and pile them up on clean cloths. They would be there frozen all winter, and every morning Mother would mold one ball into little cakes and fry them for breakfast. The end of butchering time was candle making time. Mother scrubbed the big lard kettles and filled them with bits of beef fat. Beef fat doesn't make lard, it melts into tallow. While it was melting, Almanzo helped string the candle molds. A candle mold was 2 rows of tin tubes, fastened together and standing straight up on 6 feet. There were 12 tubes in a mold. They were open at the top, but tapered to a point at the bottom, and in each point there was a tiny hole. Mother cut a length of candle wicking for each tube. She doubled the wicking across a small stick and twisted it into a cord. She licked her thumb and finger and rolled the end of the cord into a sharp point. When she had 6 cords on the stick, she dropped them into 6 tubes, and the stick lay on top of the tubes. The points of the cord came through the tiny holes in the points of the tubes, and Almanzo pulled each one tight and held it tight by sticking a raw potato on the tube's sharp point. When every tube had its wick held straight and tight down its middle, Mother carefully poured the hot tallow. She filled every tube to the top. Then Almanzo set the mold outdoors to cool. When the tallow was hard, he brought the mold in. He pulled off the potatoes. Mother dipped the whole mold quickly into boiling water and lifted the sticks. 6 candles came up on each stick. When Almanzo cut them off the stick, he trimmed the ends of wicking off the flat ends, and he left just enough wicking to light on each pointed end. And he piled the smooth, straight candles into waxy white piles. All one day, Almanzo helped Mother make candles. That night, they had made enough candles to last till butchering time next year. All right, let's talk for a minute. What did I say mark me on? What did I say mark me on? Oh, lard. Notice that there was lard that she trimmed from the inside of the pork around the organs. That's called leaf lard or leaf fat, and it's the internal fat that builds up on the organs. That makes the best lard. Okay, but you still, which they didn't tell you, is that leaf lard you would heat very slowly and then trim off the cracklings, whereas regular lard you actually boiled in water. So I think I showed both ways of trimming lard. And do you notice that these people could have afforded to live very comfortably on, by buying things like kerosene. Well, they probably bought kerosene, but by buying things like candles and kerosene and there's all these things. Remember that she used to card her own wool until a carding mill came to town, right? But these people didn't just survive, they thrived, and even if they didn't need to, they still harvested things like beech nuts off the land and berries and going fishing and stuff. Not a thing went to waste, not once. And even though they probably could have afforded to buy candles, they still made their own, because why waste it, right? I mean, these people had their shoes made, they didn't buy them. right? She made almost all of their clothing and fabric except, well, she made all of their clothing, but the fabric for everyday wear for the men was stuff that they raised on their own sheep and everything. It was just, they were so self-sufficient that, it was bloody amazing. And they still put money in the bank. Why? Because they were so self-sufficient, right? You can make emergency candles from Crisco. I've done it. I actually have a video on it, right? I actually made a button lamp on one of my Our Half Acre Homestead videos. So, I mean, I just love that how much they taught their children, But I honestly think Almanzo didn't learn as much as he could have until wisdom comes with age. And they did really, really well later on in life. Almanzo and Laura did. However, in the beginnings, you could see the differences in their upbringing. They were both brought up with the same values, but Pa was a bit of a lightfoot, and Almanzo's father was like, hey, you can have a nickel, or you can have 50 cents and buy a piglet, right? The lessons were a lot different. I'm amazed that the Ingalls girls turned out as good as they did. I really do. Maybe they learned. Oh, wait until the long winter. Yeah, we'll probably be reading that this summer, eh? You know what? Oh, it'll feel good. It'll actually feel good thinking about that. All right, chapter 23. Shall we go on? Shall we go on? Okay, just checking the chat here. All right. Chapter 23. The cobbler. And that's another thing. Before we go into that, they butchered 5 hogs and an entire steer. That's not chickens, turkeys, geese, whatever, right? They butchered 5. Now we know they had 6 children, Pearlie being the youngest and Laura Wilder being the eldest. So, and they paid French John and Lazy Joe, or French Joe and Lazy John, or whatever their names were, in fresh meat whenever they worked, or in meat. So even when they were doing sheep and stuff, they could go in the summer and take, a leg or a ham or something out of, well, maybe not in the summer, right? But, it was so much easier. Not easier. You didn't need money, but you made money because they obviously squeezed that quarter and made it fart an extra nickel every single time. Okay, the cobbler. Mother was worrying and scolding because the cobbler had not come. Almanzo's moccasins were worn to rags, and Royal had outgrown last year's boots. He had slit them all around to get his feet into them. Their feet ached with cold, but nothing could be done until the cobbler came. It was almost time for Royal and Eliza Jane and Alice to go to the academy, and I'm not wearing the right glasses. There we go. And they had no shoes, and still the cobbler didn't come. Mother's shears went snickety-snick through the web of beautiful sheep's gray cloth she had woven. She cut and fitted and basted and sewed, and she made Royal a handsome new suit with a greatcoat to match. She made him a cap with flaps that buttoned like button caps. For Eliza Jane, she made a new dress of wine-colored cloth, and she made Alice a new dress of indigo blue. The girls were ripping their old dresses and bonnets, sponging them and pressing them and sewing them together again, the other side out, to look like new. Excuse me, my leg is aching. Oh, excuse me. And that's another thing too, right? Back then, especially when you made your own fabric, right? It wasn't just print died on one side. The print was woven in 9 times out of 10. So that when they say they ripped them, that means they took their dresses apart, clean, and they always left generous seams when things had to be allowed out, and stuff like that for growing and that. But they would rip the seams, take them all apart, sponge everything down, and then flip the fabric over and sew them outside in so they look new again, right? The girls were ripping their old dresses and bonnets, sponging and pressing them, and sewing them together again, the other side out, to look new. In the evenings, Mother's knitting needles flashed and clicked, making new stockings for them all. She knitted so fast that the needles got hot from rubbing together, but they could not have new shoes unless the cobbler came in time. He didn't come. The girls' skirts hid their old shoes, but Royal had to go to the academy in his fine suit with last year's boots that were slit all around and showed his white socks through. It couldn't be helped. The last morning came. Father and Almanzo did the chores. Every window in the house blazed with candlelight, and Almanzo missed Royal in the barn. Sorry. Ow, my shoulder. Royal and the girls were all dressed up at breakfast. No one ate much. Father went to hitch up, and Almanzo lugged the carpet bags downstairs. He wished Alice wasn't going away. The sleigh bells came jingling to the door, and Mother laughed and wiped her eyes with her apron. They all went out to the sleigh. The horses pawed and shook jingles from the bells. Alice tucked the lap robe over her bulging skirts, and Father let the horses go. The sleigh slid by and turned into the road. Alice's black-veiled face looked back and called, "Goodbye, goodbye." Almanzo did not like that day much. Everything seemed large and still and empty. He ate dinner all alone with Father and Mother. Chore time was earlier because Royal was gone. Almanzo hated going into the house not to see Alice. He even missed Eliza Jane. After he went to bed, he lay awake and wondered what they were doing 5 long miles away. Next morning, the cobbler came. Mother went to the door and said to him, "Well, this is a pretty time to be coming, I must say. 3 weeks late, and my children as good as barefoot." But the cobbler was so good-natured that she couldn't be angry long. It wasn't his fault. He had been kept 3 weeks at one house making shoes for a wedding. The cobbler was a fat, jolly man. His cheeks and his stomach shook when he chuckled. He set up his cobbler's bench in the dining room, by the window, and opened his box of tools. Already, he had Mother laughing at his jokes. Father brought in last year's tanned hides, and he and the cobbler discussed them all morning. Dinner time was gay. The cobbler told all the news. He praised Mother's cooking, and he told jokes till Father roared and Mother wiped her eyes. Then the cobbler asked Father what he should make first, and Father answered, "Well, I guess you better begin with boots for Almanzo." Almanzo could hardly believe it. He had wanted boots for so long. He thought that he must wear moccasins till his feet stopped growing so fast. "You'll spoil the boy, James," Mother said, but Father answered, "He's big enough now to wear boots." Almanzo could hardly wait for the cobbler to begin. First, the cobbler looked at all the wood in the woodshed. He wanted a piece of maple, perfectly seasoned, with a straight, fine grain. When he found it, he took a small saw and he sawed off 2 tiny slabs. One was exactly an inch thick. The other was a 1/2 inch thick. He measured and sawed their corners square. He took the slabs to his cobbler's bench and sat down and opened his box of tools. It was divided into little compartments, and every kind of cobbler's tool was neatly laid in them. The cobbler laid the thicker slab of maple wood onto the bench before him. He took a long, sharp knife and cut the whole top of the slab into tiny ridges. Then he turned it around and cut ridges the other way, making tiny pointed peaks. He laid the edge of a thin straight knife in the groove between the two ridges and gently tapped it with a hammer. A thin strip of wood split off, notched all along one side. He moved the knife and tapped it till all the wood was in strips. Then, holding a strip by one end, he struck his knife into the notches, and every time he struck, a shoe peg split off. Every peg was an inch long, an eighth of an inch square, and pointed at the end. The thinner piece of maple he made into pegs too, and those pegs were a half-inch long. Now the cobbler was ready to measure Almanzo for his boots. Excuse me. Almanzo took off his moccasins and his socks and stood on a piece of paper while the cobbler carefully drew around his feet with his big pencil. Then the cobbler measured his feet in every direction and wrote down the figures. He did not need Almanzo anymore now, so Almanzo helped Frank husk corn. Almanzo helped Father. I don't know where Frank came from. So Almanzo helped Father husk corn. He had a little husking peg, like Father's big one. He buckled the strap around his right mitten, and the wooden peg stood up like a second thumb, between his thumb and his fingers. He and Father sat on milking stools in the cold barnyard by the corn shocks. They pulled ears of corn from the stalks. They took the tips of the dry husks between thumb and husking peg and stripped the husks off the ear of corn. They tossed the bare ears into bushel baskets. The stalks and rustling long dry leaves they laid in piles. The young stalk would eat the leaves. Goats loved them too. My goats loved corn stalks. So did the pigs. When they had husked all the corn they could reach, they hitched their stools forward and slowly worked their way deeper into the tasseled shocks of corn. Husks and stalks piled up behind them. Father had emptied the full baskets into the corn bins, and the bins were filling up. It was not very cold in the barnyard. The big barns broke the cold winds, and the dry snow shook off the corn stalks. Almanzo's feet were aching, but he thought of his new boots. He could hardly wait till supper time to see what the cobbler had done. That day, the cobbler had whittled out 2 wooden lasts, just the shape of Almanzo's feet. They fitted upside down over a tall peg on his bench, and they would come apart in halves. The next morning, the cobbler cut soles from the thick middle of the cowhide and inner soles from the thinner leather near the edge. He cut uppers from the softest leather. Then he waxed across a wad of black cobbler's wax in his left palm. Then he rolled the thread under his right palm, down the front of his leather apron. And then he pulled it and rolled it again. The wax made a crackling sound, and the cobbler's arms went out and in, until the thread was shiny black and stiff with wax. Then he laid a stiff hog bristle against each end of it, and he waxed and rolled till the bristles were waxed fast to the thread. At last, he was ready to sew. He laid the upper pieces of one boot together and clamped them in a vise. The edges stuck up, even and firm. With his awl, the cobbler punched a hole through them. He ran the 2 bristles through the hole, one from each side. And with his strong arms, he pulled the thread tight. He bored another hole, ran the 2 bristles through it, and pulled it till the wax thread sank into the leather. That was 1 stitch. "Now that's a seam," he said. "Your feet won't get damp in my boots, even if you go wading in them. I never sewed a seam yet that wouldn't hold water." Stitch by stitch, he sewed the uppers. When they were done, he laid the soles to soak in water overnight. Next morning, he set one of the lasts on his peg, the sole up. He laid the leather inner sole on it. He drew the upper part of the boot down over it, folding the edges over the inner sole. Then he laid the heavy sole on top, and there was the boot, upside down on the last. The cobbler bored holes with his awl all around the edge of the sole Into each sole he drove one of the short maple pegs. He made a heel of thick leather and pegged it in place with the long maple pegs. The boot was done. The damp soles had to dry overnight The damp soles had to dry overnight. In the morning, the cobbler took them out of the lasts, and with a rasp, he rubbed off the inside ends of the pegs. Almanzo put on his boots. Then they fitted perfectly, and the heels thumped grandly on the kitchen floor. Saturday morning, Father drove to Malone to bring home Alison Royal and Eliza Jane to be measured for their new shoes. Mother was cooking a big dinner for them, and Almanzo hung around the gate waiting to see Alice again. She wasn't a bit changed. Even before she jumped out of the buggy, she cried, "Oh, Almanzo, you've got new boots!" She was studying to be a fine lady. She told Almanzo all about her lessons in music and deportment, but she was glad to be home again. Eliza Jane was more bossy than ever. She said Almanzo's boots made too much noise. She even told Mother that she was mortified because Father drank tea from his saucer. "My land, how else would he cool it?" Mother asked. "It isn't the style to drink out of saucers anymore," said Eliza Jane. "Nice people drink out of the cup." "Eliza Jane!" Alice cried. "Be ashamed! I guess Father's as nice as anybody." Mother actually stopped working. She took her hands out of the dishpan and turned around to face Eliza Jane. "Young lady," she said, "if you have to show off your fine education, you tell me where saucers come from." Eliza Jane opened her mouth and shut it and looked foolish. "They come from China," Mother said. "Dutch sailors brought them from China 200 years ago. The first time sailors ever sailed around the Cape of Good Hope and found China. Up to that time, folks drank out of their cups. They didn't have saucers. Ever since they've had saucers, they've drunk from them. I guess a thing that folks have done for 200 years, we can keep on doing. We're not likely to change for a newfangled notion that you've got in Malone Academy." That shut up Eliza Jane. Royal did not say much. He put on old clothes and did his share of the chores, but he did not seem interested. And that night in bed, he told Almanzo he was going to be a storekeeper. "You're a bigger fool than I be if you dredge all your days on a farm," he said. "I like horses," said Almanzo. "Huh, storekeepers have horses," Royal answered. "They dress up every day and keep clean, and they ride around with a carriage and a pair. There's men in cities have coachmen to drive them." Almanzo did not say anything, but he did not want a coachman. He wanted to break colts, and he wanted to drive his own horses himself. Next morning, they all went to church together. They left Royal and Eliza Jane and Alice at the academy. Only the cobbler came back to the farm. Every day he whistled and worked at his bench in the dining room till all the boots and shoes were done. He was there 2 weeks, and when he loaded his bench and tools in his buggy and drove away to the next customer, the house seemed empty and still again. That evening, Father said to Almanzo, "Well, son, corn husking's done. What do you say we make a bobsled for Star and Bright tomorrow?" "Oh, Father," Almanzo said, will you let me haul wood from the timber this winter?" Father's eyes twinkled. What else would you need a bobsled for? He asked. I got to ask you folks this. I know we only did 3 chapters, but I got to ask you this. How did they play the cobbler, do you think? Like, honestly, if this guy went from, am I still here? Oh, I have to refresh my thing here. Sorry. How do you think he paid the cobbler? Like, think about it. If this guy went from house to house, and obviously well-to-do, fairly well-to-do places, right? If he went from different homes, not everybody is going to supply their own hides and leather. So I wonder if in payment he took hides from the farmers, right? Like, or cash money, because the way you look at this thing's not a lot of cash exchanged hands, eh? Well, of course he got fed for 2 weeks as well. Right? You got room and board for 2 weeks. So I honestly think that when it came to farmers and stuff like them, that he would take I'm sure 2 cow hides would do more than 5 pairs of shoes, right? Even 1 cow would do more than 5 pairs of shoes, right? So I bet you he got the leftovers and or an extra hide and his room and board, because remember, he just came from a house that he was 3 weeks making shoes for a wedding. Pretty sure those people paid cash, right? Yeah, exactly. I know. And you think, when we read The Long Winter, we're going to remember this book the most. Why? Because these people ate really, really well. Yeah, I think about the pies that his mother would serve at breakfast time. Pretty sure those apple pies, he said spicy brown juice. He didn't say spicy sweet juice. I bet you she made a lot of sugarless, like apple and raisin pies, and that would be a delicious breakfast. Like a piece of pie at breakfast, absolutely. Doesn't have to have sugar in it to be good, right? It's only been probably in the last 100 years that we really started putting sugar in everything, when the companies found out how addictive it was, especially white sugar. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Oh, and the mincemeat pie. Okay, I've made mincemeat, but I've never actually put meat in it. Has anybody here ever made mincemeat pie? And do you add, like, what's it taste like? I heard real mincemeat is like apples and venison, right? Bev, thank you for making these videos. I listen to them at night. Well, you're more than welcome. Well, yeah, they use molasses as sweetener, but I'm telling you, like when they say pure white sugar, right? They don't actually mean white sugar the way we buy it nowadays. They mean more like my organic sugar, which would look white in comparison to the dark brown molasses sugar, right? Molasses is a derivative of brown sugar. No, dear. Brown sugar is a derivative of molasses. Think about that. It took me a while to think about that. We think of it backwards because we have all these YouTube videos telling us, oh, do you want to make brown sugar? Add molasses to white sugar. But that's totally actually backwards. Okay? Molasses, think of it like maple syrup. It gets cooked down and down and down and down into granular form. And it is dark and sticky and rich. That's brown sugar. Then they bleach it. Okay? They take the granulars out and somehow brown sugar out of white sugar and molasses. We're just actually reversing the process. Right? That's not how brown sugar, you don't make brown sugar by adding molasses to white sugar. You make brown sugar by not bleaching the molasses out of the granular sugar. Does that make sense? Pretty cool, eh? And it's how history just completely turns top. This is society today. We're completely backwards. We do everything completely backwards, right? But no longer do I have enough land to raise a steer. I mean, if we really wanted to, but if Daddy's going to build a shop. Life nowadays, we've exchanged in the last 150 years, we have exchanged self-sufficiency for a monetary-based system. We've exchanged barter and self-sufficiency. We've changed over to a monetary system that no longer even has a backing in gold. You know what I mean? It's just totally, everything's turned completely upside down. Oh, actually, I remember that. It was a town. Yeah, that, oh my God, it killed so many people because the molasses is hot for starters, right? And when it blew, something blew and it flooded the town, killed so many people, right? When my parents were missionaries in Haiti, we used to chew on sugarcane. You know what? I've done that. My brother-in-law, Marty, Wendy's first husband, was really cool at educating me on flavors and things that, like, I remember him taking me, we were downtown Toronto somewhere, because my sister and we still lived in Toronto back then. And he went down this alleyway and we fought. He knew where he was going. It was like an alleyway between businesses in an ethnic district of Toronto. And suddenly I started smelling meat and curry. And he had bought these, like, they were like empanadas, but they were like an Indian curry meat filling that was, but I mean, you had to know, like, he went to the back door of the store, right? But he had brought home one day a chunk of sugar cane. And I said, what do you do with that? And I don't quite remember how he did it, but he took a piece off. Like, you take off the bark and stuff and you chew on it. And it gives you a rush. And it's not sickly sweet like sugar. It's like sap. And it gives you an energy rush. There's some countries where you go, and I think it's in India, where there's places in the market where they will put sugar cane through a press. And you buy the glass of sugarcane juice. Oh, talk about energy. I'm rendering at TLN of pig fat, a ton, that's been chopped, and making chick olive bread and saving the grease that turns hard. Well, there you go. Yeah, okay. This stuff's really good. But, I mean, it's not easy. Do you know what I actually saw at the store a couple of months ago? A great big leaf of aloe vera. And it was like $3.79. A great big one. And I thought, I didn't know you could buy leaves of aloe vera. They just break them off at the bottom and pinch them, and they go dry. And then it's self-storing, right? So I'm finally having some success with my aloe vera plant. So I'm hoping to, get it nice and big. Anyway, thank you for joining me for Farmer Boy's Little House Live Day 21. And we only have, next week starts at chapter 24. And so there's only like 5 chapters left. 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. There's 6 chapters left. So next Saturday we'll do 3. And then the following Saturday we'll finish the book. All right? I'm glad. This is Mrs. Wolfe from Reading with Beverly Wolfe saying we'll see you next week for day 22 of Little House Live Farmer Boy. Take care. God bless.